Mhm.
Welcome, everyone. We are here today to talk about a chip. This is going to be chip number 39 that Freddie has developed. This is for a fee service. I'm going to share my screen here. We'll be going through what this chip is all about, just so you get a better understanding of what it is, how you use it, and whether it might make sense to build your own, because this is potentially a business. It could be at some point. Freddie, do you want to introduce yourself to everybody?
Hello, I'm Freddie. I work at Chia Network and I have created a fee service which is implementing this standard. And I'm inviting other people to have a look at the standard and see if they would like to make some improvements to it. And they can potentially create their own fee paying service, which would be competing against mine. But that makes sense for the broader ecosystem anyway.
Quite generous of you. Thank you. Can you explain what a fee service is?
Yeah, so there are certain use cases where you might need XCH to pay for fees, but you don't actually have any. One example would be an app which is only for NFTs. And if you don't have any XCH, then you can't really do much with that. And you don't want to have to go to an exchange and buy XCH and transfer it to the wallet. And the app could just use the fee paying service to get fees to do pretty much anything you'd like.
Okay, so the service attaches a fee to any transaction, and in this case, it's a transaction where you don't actually own the XCH. And how do you pay for the fee paying service?
I mean, different fee paying services could take different payment methods. I'm accepting Stripe payments as a subscription, and the user basically will send the spend bundle to an HTTP endpoint, and the endpoint internally is going to calculate some fees and attach the fees to it, return the spend bundle with fees, and then different fee paying services might charge in different ways. They might charge either based on the total amount of fees that were added, or they might charge based on the number of requests, things like that. Um, the kind of ideas I've had for enterprise use cases would be things like the number of concurrent spends that you can attach fees to at the same time, because you can imagine an enterprise application would potentially need to do like hundreds of transactions at the same time. And that's a way of being able to charge money for it.
Excellent. Uh, and to let everybody know, we actually have this service running and we're using it in the Cloud Vault as we speak. There's a situation that comes up there where if you want to recover your vault, uh, you don't actually have any XCH to spend by definition because you've lost the keys to your vault. So you need to spend the vault to put in the recovery mode, and you you can do that, but you can't attach a fee to it because you don't have the XCH. And normally with our testnet, we have it being dusted quite heavily. So if you don't attach a fee on the testnet, then it's probably going to take 45 minutes to an hour for your transaction to go through because the you have to get in line with all the dust. So what this service then does is automatically attaches a fee and your vault recovery process begins. And then there's a couple other times where this will be done in the cloud vault specifically. So is that the reason why you developed it for the cloud vaults initially, Freddie?
I was initially developing this for a completely different project, but then we realized when doing the recovery for a vault that since you're using the recovery key and not the key that actually allows you to spend things in the vault, um, fees need to come from somewhere. And since I'd already built the fee service, it was a quick way to solve the problem.
Great. Are there any other initial questions about how the fee service works or what its potential use cases might be?
Um, I guess I have two things. The first one is a bit technical, but you first of all, you have to make sure that the fee spends are not being separated from the original spends in the mempool or when a block has been created. And I just want to confirm, is the way that that's being done with assert concurrent spend, or is that using receive message? I think it was said down below.
Yeah, so this chip suggests ways of doing it, but it doesn't currently specifically say you have to do it in a certain way. the fee service that I've created is using assert concurrent spend at the moment, and it was asserting announcements. You could do a combination of this. Like you could check to see if there are any announcements and assert the announcements, or you could check if messages have been sent and receive them and things like that. Um, I guess it's kind of up to different fee services to do that, unless it becomes part of the actual spec.
Yeah. And then the other question is like one of the main use cases I could see this being useful for is paying the one mojo to make a vault. If you don't have XCH and you need to make mint a new vault, this would be a
Yep.
really easy way to pay for that.
So this is also not in the chip, but my fee service does have an endpoint which can just mint any singleton. So you could do it that way as well. It's kind of like an even easier way of doing it because then you don't even need to write any of the code to do that. You just send. You'd have to calculate the inner puzzle for the singleton, but then it will mint it for you. Yeah.
To build on Brennan's question, for example, for the bridge, uh, we have these welcome kits, which basically allow users that are new to Chia to finish a bridging transaction, and that requires some modules input on Chia as well as a fee. And we do that with a one-sided offer that has one of these assert concurrent spans in it. Would a fee service be able to help with that as well, or is that outside the scope of this chip?
I think it's outside the scope of this chip. It's not really doing anything with author files. This is more about a API that a fee service can implement, like an HTTP endpoint. I guess if there could be another API for doing this, perhaps something like that.
So you can't also request some modules from the fee service. It's only for fees.
So this chip, yes, it's pretty much just an endpoint you send a spend bundle to, and it returns the spend bundle with fees attached.
And can people specify the fee they want attached, or is it up to the service to determine?
I specify what? Sorry, I didn't catch that.
The fee to be
Oh,
bundled with the transaction.
right now, no, that's something that could be added to it. At the moment, it's using, at least my implementation. This is something which fee services could compete on, by the way. They could compete on different calculations. But my one is just calling the RPC to get a fee estimate and then adding a few extra mojos to it. Pretty basic way of doing it. But if different fee services calculated it in different ways, they could potentially charge less money to provide the service.
I think that fee estimator had an issue recently where it recommended a 5 XCH fee for certain transactions. So
That
might be good.
sounds not very good. Yeah, my plan was to use that just because I don't want to write a fee estimator myself because it's quite difficult to do it well.
Yeah, have you put any limitations on the fee that it will automatically pay out just in case of an attack?
I haven't done that so far. It's currently only being used on testnet, but that's a good idea.
Yeah, yeah, I'd hate to see you have to pay a huge fee.
Yeah. Especially if there's like 100
Um,
concurrent transactions doing that.
It's all right. I'll just invoice the user however much it costs and hope that they pay.
true. Uh, yeah,
How
on this.
is the sorry?
Oh, I was just going to point out on this competition thing. It can kind of turn into like a bit of a game of chicken if the mempool is relatively full because you want to get pretty close to that five mojo per cost minimum in order to get to the front of the line. But you, the estimator isn't always exactly accurate. So if you underestimate by a little bit, then you might as well just put in a one mojo fee or a yeah the bare minimum fee, so you get sent all the way back to the end of the mempool. Whereas if you're just above, then you should get in right away.
That actually brings up another question, which is, does the fee service have a mechanism for replace by fee?
No. So what in that case you would get a spend bundle with some fees attached and then replace them with another spend that has more fees or something like that?
Yeah,
You'd
Uh,
have to use a superset of the coins, so you'd actually have to add another fee coin, I think.
Mhm. Or you could send the fee service the spend bundle that does have the fees, and then since the service has those coins, it could respend them with a higher fee, um, keeping the superset rule in mind.
Right. RBF does seem pretty useful in this case because there are times where you might just not include a high enough fee at first.
Yeah, I know Dexy was trying to do a add-on RBF solution as well, but their solution was just strapping on fees, and it made it so that farmers could strip the fee if they wanted.
Oh, okay. There's uh, this does seem somewhat flexible as far as how you could implement it, and so it'd be good to get in just a few other considerations for not necessarily Freddie for how you're doing it, but just how it could be done.
I just
Uh,
wonder, is the chip just documenting that you can create a service like this, or should we spell out all the different endpoints that would be useful to implement in the spec?
It's mostly about the body and the request body and the response body, so that you can just switch one fee service for another and it would work.
Mhm.
yeah, I agree. If it's going to be a chip, it should be somewhat modular so that you could switch between services, and then you could have optional additional stuff it should just be mentioned just in case someone's implementing a new one that they have a little bit of an instruction set for how to do certain features.
Like for example, the minting a singleton, should that be documented as well in this chip, or should it be a separate chip?
I haven't added that to the chip because it's not really a fee service thing. It just happens to be a feature that I've created for that.
Um, yeah, agreed. You could potentially put it in as just a extra note at the end, but it doesn't need to be a core part of the chip at all because it's not related to the fee. But yeah, it would be good to get any other suggestions in the comments for the chip too. And Yak, what was the other question you were going to ask?
Does the chip specify how the fee service will bill the customer? So are customers based on usage, or are there different tiers and that come with limits, or is that outside the scope?
It's outside the scope. I think that's something that different services can compete with on.
Is the identity model addressed, or is that outside the scope too? Like, is there an API key standard, or um, how are you correlating back to your customers?
Yeah, that's not included. This is just the HTTP request. In my case, there's a header that you send that lets it know which user you are with a JSON web token in it. But
I
yeah,
guess
I guess you shouldn't be adding it to the body because that's then interfering with the spec.
I guess even if you have different authentication methods per API, that would prevent you from being able to like switch them out for each other in a request. So you'd still have to manually
Yeah.
like add support for each fee service to the wallet in that case.
Yeah, there would be a small bit of code tweaking there. Yeah, because there's like the way you log in and get a session back, like that. Should that be in the spec? Because that's not even to do with fee services. That's just like authentication.
I don't know.
I
What
think
is the
that
customer? Sorry.
yeah, in my opinion, for the chip itself, it should be if you want to implement a fee service, here's the minimum amount you need to do, uh, and just make sure that it's easy enough for users to switch between different services, and so that someone else can come in and implement a brand new fee service. They've never talked to any of us, and they just have to follow your instructions, and it should just work right out of the box. Maybe it won't have all the extra bells and whistles, but it'll still be a fee service that's however you're defining the minimum viable product for a fee service. Hopefully that makes sense. And then because there's so many so much flexibility with this. It would just be good to have a separate section that you could just add on. Like, by the way, here's some extra things that I've done that maybe you'd consider doing, but are not required. These are just optional.
Yeah, I feel like adding authentication is a bit much because like there might be an API that somebody's already providing and they want to add fee service support, and you don't want to have to make them create a whole new authentication mechanism just to be able to implement the spec.
Right, agreed on that. But something like how you would do RBF or
Yeah,
how
RBF I'll add into this. I'm thinking it would just would you just have RBF as it's just doing RBF if you provide a spend bundle that's already got fees attached? Just the default behavior.
As long as the fee spends are coins that the fee service owns, it could like remove the original fee spends and add new ones with the same coins and or add
Does
additional.
that does that work? Because I thought you have to add more. Like you have to have exactly the same plus more, or can you do that?
As long as you spend the same coins or more, it doesn't matter if the puzzle or the solution changes.
Okay.
Although I guess you'd have to subtract the signature. So I'm not sure that would work.
I think you might be better off daisy chaining your fee coins in that case.
Add an additional one.
Yeah, and then have that certain concurrent spin go back to the previous coin as well.
That's another way.
It gets more expensive from a cost perspective, but I think it would probably be less error prone.
Mm.
so potentially a couple options there.
I guess as long as the endpoint works, it doesn't really matter how it's implemented.
So with RBF, do we need to do something? Like you can send a spend bundle with fees attached, but it needs to know that it needs more fees because you're doing RBF. So it's like you need to do something.
We'd have to know that the spend bundle is already in the mempool, and then figure out how much additional fee it needs to be a valid replaced by fee. Because I think there's a minimum of 5 fee per cost increase or something.
Uh, there's a flat
Yeah,
minimum
that's
too.
correct.
Isn't there a minimum of some millions of mojos?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd have to look up what it is. But yeah, flat fee and a 5 FPC, whichever is the lower of the two.
I guess the simplest thing would be to let the wallet just determine how much of a fee it wants to add within reason. I'm not sure. That could be an attack vector as well if you're charging per API call and they specify a huge fee.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think because this is going to be used by applications where they like are trying not to even let you know that there is XEH involved. Like if there's just an NFT app and then they need to use replace by fee for some reason, you don't really want the app to have to be calculating all of that because it's like not the business domain that they care about.
That's true. Yeah.
No, it almost seems in that case the fee service has to be monitoring the mempool and be able to identify the spend it receives as already in the mempool.
Well, you could have like another request parameter that's just like, is this already submitted or not?
I know we have an awesome chip that allows us to actually identify transactions in the mempool.
I guess the problem with that is that every node has a different mempool.
Agreed.
Yeah, that fact in itself makes things pretty tricky.
Yeah, the CHIP-26 mempool stuff is kind of like uh, on a best case basis. Like if the peers that you're talking to have the transactions in the mempool, you'll get notified of it, but there's no guarantee.
Yeah, I wish Andreas were still on the call. It was the wrong time for him to drop. I was going to ask him about his XEH events and whether or not he's done some form of a cluster to better identify mempool items, or if he's just using a single node.
I guess with a fee service, you could create like a giga mempool where it just like has a higher cap and would accept pretty much everything from the mempool.
You mean just locally?
Yeah, like you just increase the mempool size for your own node.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
you could perhaps increase your peer count too to increase your chances of seeing more of them.
Yeah.
One question I had, there were some talks about front running in the chip. Um, I had wondered if it were possible that some fee services might actually want to do this directly on the mempool. Could you speak to any considerations of why you wouldn't like register pub keys that you serve as customers and do this in a mempool? There might definitely be really good reasons, but I had actually thought about creating a service like this that monitored um, the mempool directly versus a request response.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. I hadn't really thought about it, I guess, because yeah, you can't completely rely on the mempool, but it would make things easier for them.
Well, there is the caveat that if you are submitting to the mempool without fees, if the mempool is full, it will just straight up reject the spend bundle. And also, if you are adding fees to a transaction that isn't yet in the mempool, you don't have to necessarily add as much as you would if it was already in the mempool to replace it. So I think it'd be cheaper to do it beforehand.
So you could do fee bumping as a service if it was good enough to get in the mempool, but you could not guarantee someone with no XCH to trip into the mempool. That's fair. That's a good point. Thank you.
Mhm.
Any other questions or thoughts? So sounds like no. So this chip, I guess we could just keep it open for a while. I mean, it's not an urgent thing to finalize it. But as we go forward, feel free to leave any comments in the chip itself. And I think we've gotten some good ideas out of today's call. So thanks for everybody for joining. If you have any other questions, feel free to let me know on Discord or Keybase. And Freddie's around on both of those domains as well, I guess. And
And on X, 0x BC.
all right, sounds good.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. See you.
Thanks, guys.
Have a great day, all.
Yeah.